Hey, welcome to Chapter 6 summary for BIOL1322. This Chapter 6 is over protein. So we're going to be working on protein structure and function and in our diet and everything. This is our subjects for Chapter 6. So I'm talking about what protein is, what it does, how it works, and how to get enough of it. So let's start off talking about what protein is made of. Protein is made of things called amino acids, and each individual amino acid is a very small molecule. It only has, most of them have only about a dozen atoms in it or so. But they have an amine group and an acid group on them. And the amine group from one amino acid can make a bond, a covalent bond to a carboxylic acid group on another amino acid and form what's called a peptide bond, which is just a kind of covalent bond between two amino acids. And so what this means is that basically you can link amino acids into a long chain. You can make a long, long chain of these individual amino acids. And there's 20 different amino acids that our bodies use. There's actually more than that in nature, but the ones we use, we only use these 20 amino acids. So there's 20 different amino acids that we use. If you need all of them in your diet, if you're missing any of them, it's like trying to write an essay while missing one of your keys on your keyboard. It just simply is not possible. And so all 20 of these amino acids are essential for our life, for our survival, but we call some of them essential amino acids because we can't make them out of other amino acids. So there's usually 9 amino acids that if you don't have them in your diet in sufficient amounts, you start having hair falling out and you lose energy and you end up dying. What you'll see is the other amino acids are called non-essential amino acids, or sometimes they're known as conditionally essential amino acids because you could have potentially an enzyme deficiency of some kind in your body where you can't make one of the amino acids, or an excess of the amino acid could be toxic to you because you're missing an enzyme to break it down. So there's some people sometimes have, that's what, for example, phenylketonuria is an example of a disorder where you're missing an enzyme that processes one of the amino acids. But in general, there's a list of 9 amino acids you have to have enough of in your diet, or else because you can't make them out of any other amino acid. And so again, those are what we call essential amino acids. And a lot of foods that have, there's plenty of foods that have all of the amino acids, all of the essential amino acids really have all 20. And we call those complete protein. And if you are missing, and if you're not eating things that have complete protein, you have to be a little more careful. You have to make sure you're eating the different foods that have the different amino acids in them so that you're getting all of your essential amino acids. So the amino acids are put together inside your cells using several different structures. The information that is that has the sequence of what amino acids to put in order to make what proteins is in your DNA. Since we all have DNA, that means our proteins are slightly different from each other. We have all the same proteins in our bodies, except for people who are missing things like I mentioned with phenylketonuria. But if your DNA is slightly different from someone else's, it might mean that your protein shape is very slightly different. And your enzymes might be a little different, which is why we have different hair color. We grow to be different heights. We have different alcohol tolerances and so forth. That's just variations in how our bodies, our proteins are shaped and how much of them we have. And so what happens is that DNA information, the DNA has to stay in the nucleus of the cell. It can't come out. And so the DNA information is copied. So the DNA molecule actually opens up and an RNA molecule is built that matches it. And that RNA molecule called mRNA is like a Xerox copy. It's a temporary copy and it will break down after a while. The DNA obviously doesn't break down because it's irreplaceable. This process is called transcription. So the transcription is just the copying of the DNA information onto an RNA molecule. The RNA molecule then leaves the nucleus and goes to what's called the ribosome, which is a structure that's in the cytoplasm. The ribosome binds, and this big gray guy here is the ribosome. And the ribosome is basically a workbench that allows the mRNA molecule to match up with what's called the tRNA molecule. And the tRNA molecule matches the mRNA molecule on one side to an amino acid on the other. because the different letters, finger quote letters in the mRNA, which come from the DNA, mean different amino acids. So we create a chain of amino acids that basically will ultimately become a protein. So this process here is called translation. So we have a two-step process: transcription and translation. And at the end of this process, I have a bunch of these chains of amino acids that fold up to make a protein. Remember, protein is a three-dimensional structure that's all coiled up. The different amino acid doesn't coil up randomly either. The amino acids have positive and negative charges on them that make them attach to each other. They have sulfur that can make sulfide. If you've ever smelled burning hair, it smells awful because of the sulfur that's in hair, because sulfur bonds, disulfide bonds, are used to attach things to each other in protein. So we have this process for making protein. You might be wondering, why do we do that? Well, the thing is that our cells have to constantly rebuild their own proteins because they suffer from wear and tear. So, for example, the cytoskeleton and mitochondria are two different things that have a lot of protein. That those proteins wear down, they have to be rebuilt. So that's one example of why cells do protein synthesis. But another really important thing is that our cells contribute to our overall health and structure by making things and that do things in our body. So I have a list of examples of things that our proteins do. And again, these are some examples. You can see these amino acids on long coiled up chains, and those coiled up chains end up attaching to each other and making some shaped molecule that has a specific function. So the top three most important things that are proteins that we easy to think of: enzymes, which catalyze chemical reactions and basically make chemical reactions happen quicker in our body. So fructokinase is an example of an enzyme that's given in your book. It helps process sugars for breaking down sugar for energy, and that is an enzyme that you have to have in your body. If you have less of that enzyme, you can't burn energy as well. If you don't have that enzyme at all, you may not get born. You may not be able to process energy, carbohydrates. Hormones are signal molecules that bind to other cells and change their behavior. So, for example, insulin is super important. We already saw insulin earlier. Insulin's a protein. It's secreted by the pancreas, which means there's cells in the pancreas that are doing the protein synthesis thing that I just showed. They build up little little sacks full of insulin, and they release it when when your body needs insulin in order to stimulate your cells to absorb carbohydrates. And then the most common protein in the body is collagen. You can see that the collagen molecule is a long chain of amino acids, and these chains kind of braid together, and these braids then kind of join together and make a fiber. And these collagen fibers are what make your bones really strong. They make your skin really strong. They make your ligaments and tendons. They are in the lining of your eye. They're in the membranes around your brain. So they're meninges. So they're really important for a lot of holding us together. Other really important protein functions is hemoglobin is example of a transport protein. Hemoglobin binds to oxygen and transports it through the body. Antibodies are an example of immunoproteins, immunoglobulins, that they bind to bacteria and viruses and destroy them or help destroy them. And then neurotransmitters are chemicals that operate in our brain. So dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine are all made using amino acids. And so that's also an example of really important things to have enough protein. So I'll notice that a protein is used for all these things. One of the easiest signals if someone's getting enough protein is your hair. Because hair, obviously if you don't have enough insulin, you kind of die pretty quickly. If you don't have enough hair, you can live for a while. So people who are on a low protein diet, often one of the first signs you'll see they're not getting enough protein is that they're having trouble building muscle mass if they're trying, but also that their hair may be getting thin and falling out, because hair is made with a protein which is called keratin, which is another structural protein. It's kind of like collagen, but it works differently. Don't confuse the two. They're both very important, but they're different from each other. But the keratin that's in your hair, if you're not getting enough protein in your diet, you will make more. So let's talk a little bit about proteins and in our diet. So when you eat something with protein in it, before you can actually digest it, you actually have to denature it, which means that the protein comes coiled up. That's how our proteins act in our body. You might recognize just in the previous slide. Imagine you're eating some plant or animal, and it's got these proteins that are all coiled up amino acid chains. You can't break apart the amino acids until you've unraveled that coil. And so, in order to do that, that's actually what the stomach acid is for in your stomach. It also kills bacteria and so forth, but it doesn't really digest the food. But what it does do is it helps unravel that protein. The enzyme pepsin, which is in your stomach, also helps unravel, but it also starts the process of breaking apart the peptide chains. And so pepsin is produced by the cells of the stomach, and it actually starts this process. But then that further digestion has to happen with other enzymes that are secreted from the pancreas that go into the small intestine. So that would be trypsin is the key one, but then also chymotrypsin and carboxypeptidase, other enzymes that do that. And you break it down all the way to these 1, 2, and 3 amino acid chains, which are monopeptides, dipeptides, and tripeptides, right? And then those are actually broken apart with enzymes in the small intestine, and they're absorbed into the bloodstream, and that blood actually goes to the liver. The liver will, at this point, can do what's called transamination, which means changing what amino acid it is, changing one amino acid to another in the case of the non-essential amino acids. And breaking potentially if you have an excess amino acids. For example, if you're really hungry and you just eat just a straight up chicken breast, or you just take a scoop of protein powder, just swallow it. You need carbohydrates for energy for your cells, and so if you're really hungry, your liver will break apart those proteins, amino acids, and turn them into carbohydrates, and then it'll release the ammonia. So the amine part, which is a nitrogen, will be released as ammonia, which will become urea. And so the more high protein your diet is, the more urea is normally in your urine because it's cleared by your kidneys. This is one thought about what a high protein diet might stress your kidneys, because you're producing a lot of ammonia as a waste product from breaking down all this protein for energy. Some proteins are more readily digested than others. So, for example, meat is the most digested, has what's called the highest bioavailability, compared to some plant proteins are less bioavailable. It's harder to break them down, absorb them. Let's talk for a minute about protein sources in food. Now, there's a perception that being a vegetarian can result in having a difficult time getting enough protein in your diet. There's some reason for that. It's kind of exaggerated, but there is some rationale for it. There's a couple of things that are going on. One is that the protein that's in meat is a higher concentration and is more bioavailable. The other thing is meat is always a complete protein, versus if you look at if you look at grains, especially, are often missing different amino acids. So they're some of the essential amino acids. You have to perform what's called mutual supplementation if you're eating all plant material. Or you have to be eating complete protein, like quinoa, for example, is a complete plant protein. If you're eating grains, then you have to pair it with legumes, like beans or soy, so forth. Soy, I think, actually is complete protein. This is one reason why meat is perceived as being a better source of protein, which it's more bioavailable, and of course it may be a little easier to prepare compared to, and I don't know if necessarily if plants are harder to prepare, but they tend to go bad in your fridge first, and so it basically takes more effort, and it can be more costly to be a vegetarian than to just eat meat, just be done with it and get enough amino acids that way. But it's absolutely a viable strategy to be a vegetarian. There's different kinds of vegetarians. If you're a vegan where you're not even eating eggs, then can make it a little harder, because eggs are an excellent source of complete bioavailable protein. But it's still possible to be a vegan and get enough protein in your diet. There's also some concern about vitamin B12 and iron and so forth. You basically have to pay more attention to your diet if you are a vegan or a vegetarian. You have to put more effort into making sure you're getting enough of all the different protein, amino acids in your protein diet. But it's absolutely viable. It may also be a little bit more expensive, and may require more planning and more time cooking than just simply putting some meat on the grill and then calling it good. So if you look, the book has some more lengthy summaries of different types of vegetarian diets and what can be missing in each of those situations. We have to balance that against the fact that red meat often has a lot of saturated fat. Eating meat is actually worse for the environment because it takes a lot more energy to grow a cow than to grow that amount of corn. So there's just all things that we have to balance against one another. Um, so hopefully that all makes sense, and hope that chapter 6 is going well for you guys. The midterm exam is coming up. It's over chapters 1 through 6, and it's over everything we've gone through up to this point. So make sure you just ask me your questions. Make sure you're posting on the discussion boards, and I'll see you again soon.